Okay, so we've got to have a little go at doing something a little bit different with watercolour today. We've got some beautiful kind of meadow pictures here. Obviously, there's several. There's some with snowdrops on as well. What I've gone for are really busy pictures, like really busy photographs here of areas of kind of like different meadows and things like that, different times of the year. But the idea being that um, we can kind of have a little experiment with masking fluid more specifically tonight, and how that kind of can affect as not getting too kind of lost in getting the foliage in, but being able to kind of like block out a few of those areas before, so then we can be a bit looser with the work that we actually go in with. So that's the idea behind it. I'm going to go for this one just because I quite like how you get these real bright white areas at the front, and then there's a few lighter ones at the back as well in there. But you can go for this one. When we're using masking fluid, really, I mean, I've got this one, which works in the same way, but it's what the idea behind masking fluid is that when you paint it on, it's got so a lot of them have got latex added, which is basically kind of a plastic that when it's dry and then you paint over it, it repels because obviously it's got a repellent film on so that the paint doesn't go over it. And then after your paint is dry, then you can kind of like peel it off with your finger and it leaves those light bits behind. So you've kind of gone over and worked over all these other, some of the other colours on. So it works really well when you've got a very busy picture with lots of lighter areas in, and you think, oh my goodness, I can't possibly paint these layers on and then remember like to leave them all, because sometimes it's quite tricky. The one thing with it is it will have different effects. So generally, when you put um, when you put these on, they do kind of block out a shape. So what I would say is it leaves quite a it can leave quite a harder edge. So what we have to do is kind of work it, if we want to soften something down, like where this is blurred out or this is blurred out in the background, when we peel it off, we might have to go back in and just soften those edges down where we don't want them and keep them more crisp where we do. So that's what we can do. And we still will be building up our picture as we go. So we'll still be adding layers on top um, and going from lightest to darkest. So that really helps us to make sure we can get like the different colours in. I'm going to go, as I said, demonstrate this one. But whichever one you choose, or one of the snowdrops, whatever it is, it'll be a really good chance to experiment with colour, and a particular experiment with how this goes on and how we layer it up, really. It makes it easier in terms of not making, like lots and lots of kind of it's very easy with watercolor because we can't go over with the white color of watercolor. It makes it really easy to kind of go into all those areas, not go into all those areas with the masking fluid on. So and I've got a few ways of applying this as well. So I know Marilyn kindly mentioned last week about you can prepare your brushes. Actually, you can just wet the brush that you're going to use, or just use a really old brush. That's the other thing to apply it. But I've got also just a cocktail stick to show you as well. We don't need to do anything to that. But if we're I'm just dampening my brush and kind of wiping it off there, and I've got a little bit of washing up liquid in here, just a really small amount, and just kind of wipe it through. But then take the excess off with a bit of tissue or a bit of flannel or something like that. And then when you go into using your masking fluid, it won't kind of ruin your brush as much as it would normally. It does dry really hard though. So even in a session, if you kind of leave it there just on the side, it can dry it hard then. So once you've finished using your brush, you want to get it into the water and give it a really good kind of wish round and make sure it's nice and all the stuff's out. You can even pop a bit more washing up liquid on if you want to kind of rinse it through. It's a bit of a waiting game. So we do need to let it dry until it feels tacky to the touch. So, I mean, there's quite a bit of mapping out anyway and looking at where all your light areas. I'm going to particularly start with where all the white areas are. Um, if you've got the darker areas, you don't have to put the masking fluid on for those, although I did this morning because I wanted to kind of see where these were going to come down to, but you don't have to, is all I'm saying. You can just put the light areas in if you want to. It was more for me, just a trick of my eye to go, yes, they're all there. I can see where they're going. Um, so yeah, so it's a bit of a waiting game, waiting for it to dry, but like obviously we've got to kind of map it out. And if you can pretty much go in with these without doing any drawing at all. If you want to keep it really, really loose and flowy and kind of drop colours in a little bit, and I'll talk about dropping colours in later, but you can, you don't even have to draw these kind of shapes or flowers at all. If you do, it obviously needs to be really lightly. But you can just start going in there. I am going to do it for the sake of the camera actually as well, but really lightly. So you might be able to you just pick this up. So all I'm doing is I've got a few little shapes in here. Now, anything that's right in the background, you can also kind of block those out as well. Any light coloured stems that you want to kind of go in a darker colour behind or whatever, pop those in as well with the masking fluid. But I'm just drawing these, I am drawing it out, as I said, just because I want to get a sense of place in there. But this, this makes it like less, I suppose, fluid. It's more just so that I know that I've kind of got an idea where everything is for my composition. So even though this daisy's got like a yellow center, I'm still going to pop the whole thing out. And again, you might decide once you do it that you don't like the shape of it, but in that case, you can work into it, probably not work out because obviously we'll have already gone over the background colors. So in fact, I'll put mine in a bit thicker so you can see it. But yeah, it's really just, as I said, just experimenting with seeing what it's like when we do this. Because the other thing we would do, and I tend to do, is if I'm doing something like this, is to go over the colour and lift it out. But because there's so much going on, sometimes it's difficult to do that because you think, where in this layer, what am I taking out and what am I leaving? So I'm going in with all these daisies to start with, and some of these little buds as well that are behind the daisies, just to help me out with working out what's going on. So I'm trying to get some of the shape in, but you don't have to. You can pop it in as a block and work into it if you want to. We'll put another one there. As I said, if you've got the things there, you might just want to put it on without actually doing any lines. But you can actually go in and literally draw, like paint on the daisy shapes if you want to. Or make it a bit more loose and then decide a bit later on. And these two little buds down here, so it's things like this I want to get in because I'm not sure that I would remember to do that. We've also, with the watercolour anyway, we've got like the added kind of complication. People do think, oh, it is quite difficult, but I think it's just all we're doing is learning some ways around it, that's all. But what can happen as well is we've got the watercolour paint. We can drop bits in as well, which is really lovely and makes it very loose if you're going for like that loose effect. But also the way sometimes watercolour behaves, we don't always know what it's going to do. So I would say definitely this is one to let go of, and just, I mean, we'll have some success using the masking fluid anyway, that these areas are not going to, it's not going to go into these areas. But it can kind of, if you start dropping colours in and things, it can just not quite go where we're expecting it to go. So I think it's always, somebody described it as magical today, and I thought, yeah, that's quite a good explanation because it can like come up with some amazing, interesting results, and other times, it goes kind of where you expect it to. So it is interesting. So don't get upset with yourself, was all I was going to say, because sometimes it just does it. There's nothing you maybe would have done. It's just moves in a certain way. I'm just kind of popping out where all of these lovely little flowers are going, these kind of lighter ones. But again, as I said, you can just go straight in putting the masking fluid on. This is more kind of to help me with the shapes of them. It's kind of and if it's really difficult to see what the outline is because it's so loose, then just make it like that. Put another one in there that's loose, because when it's getting more into the background, then it is more fuzzy, isn't it? You can't really see. It's a little bit clearer when we're near the beginning. Hence why I was drawing these sticks, the stems on, just because I was like, I can't sometimes visualize when they're floating. I want to see what's going on behind it, but that's just a personal thing. It's definitely, yeah, patience is definitely needed with letting it dry, but there's loads we can be doing. We can be just mixing all the different colours whilst we're waiting for it to dry as well, which is nice. What else have we got in here? Okay, so it's actually really quite enjoyable working just through the process of doing this. Actually, a lot of people really enjoyed that today. Just kind of popping it on and everything. So again, like any painting, if you want to leave bits off, just leave it off. You don't have to put everything on. Something else there, isn't there? It's just behind these. I'm put one more in there. But yeah, you don't have to draw these in. It's just if it kind of helps you to find where you want to place them. And then if there's any other light areas you want to kind of pop in. Now I'm not going to draw these slightly lighter areas that I want to leave blank in here. I'm just going to kind of put the masking fluid on, and I've purposefully bought the blue because I'm hoping that it'll show up on camera for you, because I know white doesn't often show up on camera when it's wet, so I'm hoping it will. So then if you've prepped your brush, you could use your brush, but the other thing you can do is like pour a little bit out into the lid or something, and you can just use like the end of a cocktail stick or something, and just kind of move it around so you get like, I think I need a bit more on the end of there. But again, it's you might want to try this first. You might want to try it first on you see, oh, actually it does show up, that's great. You might want to try it first on like a bit of paper first, if you wanted to, just to see how it flows if you do that. Now you might find what I'm doing here really awkward and think, I don't want to do that. And that's fine if you prefer your brush, but I'm going to bring those stems down. Again, you don't have to do that at all. That's just a me thing, because I just want to see where it's going. But you don't have to do that at all. Yeah, so it's kind of like working out how thickly to put it on. Or you can try, I'm going to put all of these on first before I show you something else. Just making sure you've got a good coverage. I know it doesn't need to be really thick either, that's a bit thick on there. So it's learning, for me, learning how much to actually put on. Because I don't, to be fair, use masking fluid that often. I prefer to do like to lift out, but it's good when you're doing like where you've got lots and lots of layers of things. So I'm just going to brush that on. And that's another thing, so you want it not too thick, but thick enough that it's definitely giving a coverage. The stick's really good for kind of fine areas as well. And you're just working through like a little process. That's a bit, yeah, it's quite good, is that, for the stems actually. So I'm working through all the specifically. Now, the other thing is, I should have mentioned that perhaps at the beginning, is you're not supposed to shake masking fluid pots. It's what we want to do, want to mix it, but just give it a really, like just a really light mix with something instead, because basically the air bubbles stop it from, there's too many air bubbles in. It doesn't help it. There we go. Yeah. So this is just a way of making your brushes stay a bit nicer for longer, and also you can move it around in different ways as well, and kind of push it with the point, which is an interesting way. But as I said, if you think, oh no, I don't like it, then just get your brush. And again, depending on whether you're in a warm room or a colder room will affect how quickly it dries as well. But that's okay. I think what it's good for is it's really teaches us to be really patient. It did this morning. We all slowed down loads because we were waiting and just mixing colours and things. Yeah, just moving that around a little bit. Yeah, just enjoy that, getting into that. We don't often focus, do we, on making all these lines and things like that. It's just a bit different. Yeah, it's quite important not to scratch the paper surface as well if you can help it. That's what happens when we try and remove the can happen when we try and move it to, try and take it off too early when it's not dry. We can actually end up with that's a lot on there. Yeah, we can end up with a bit with it scrubbing the paper off, and then when you put your paint over the, it can kind of take the surface up a little bit. So you just got to be a bit mindful of that when you come to that. I think it's much more kind of a precise technique, is this. I'll show you another way of applying it in a moment with a flicking it, which is an interesting finish. I'm going in the bigger areas and then just kind of pulling it out into those thinner bits. A lot of people really like it if they're doing kind of a big landscape and they've got, like, the bark on trees, or they're doing trees with lots of leaves or something where there's a lot of dappled light and it's difficult to kind of work in tiny bits at a time. So a lot of people quite like it for that as well. Or as I said, like doing big areas of flowers, it is helpful for, especially lots of lighter ones like there is in these pictures. Like a process, isn't it, of just kind of blocking out the areas that we need to. But because these, these stems are darker, you don't really need to do that. Where you've got the light coloured stalks, you probably will want to block those ones out on there, on the other picture. Does give you some quite nice control though, stops you getting, you haven't got a tiny brush that's an older one, it just stops that getting ruined, so that's quite good. And also as you go, as time goes on, you kind of get used to how it feels applying it. And the more times you do it as well, of course, that will be helpful as well. All right, in the middle of these. Put the centres in the more easily, and then I'll just spread it out a little bit as I go. You can also get like the little rubber tools to do it. Some people do it with those, like almost like the little tools you can use for paint other paints as well. Drying on this stick already and it's getting springy. So this one has got natural latex in. It's got some kind of different ingredients in it, so it's not actual natural latex in. which is good. You know, people can be allergic to latex as well. Now, a lot of people with watercolour want to use hair dryers to dry things off, but with latex, it's not a good idea. Like, so with these, it's not a good idea because what it can do is make it attach more with the heat to the paper and make it really difficult to get it off. So certainly when we're using masking fluid, I wouldn't do that at all to speed the process up. Otherwise, we could end up with a bit of a sticky mess on there. So I'm just going to go in now and see if there's anywhere else, like any little buds or anything I want to add in this background here that I can just spotted there. I missed these out earlier when I was doing my demonstration, or it might be some lighter coloured leaves on the stem. And this is part of the reason I've actually masked up some of these stems so that I don't miss some of these, you know, lighter areas. I can add them later on if I want to. You do often, you know, get these little highlights, don't you, of some of the stems. Going off to there like that. Now, if you see any light ones, just pop them in. Just makes it as freer to be able to go in with these, you know, build these colours up as we go over the top. What else have we got in here? Really, I'm just going to move my bracelet because it's banging on the desk. It's probably quite annoying to people. Just take it off. There we go. So I'm just continuing to add this again. But yeah, I mean, it will make things more precise and we can, as I said, soften those down as we go. Little flecks in here. We'll pop them in. Now in the back here, so I've kind of done that there. I'm just going to just use my brush just to dab in because these are kind of lilac colours, but they feel quite light there. And because we've got these orange colours in between, I actually want to go in with the two different layers. Where we've got opposing colours on the colour spectrum, so these are cools with the blue base in, like purples, and we've got warms. So if we kind of like mix them in and let those drop in, it might actually make them make a strange colour. So we can to some extent, but I also want to I'm just working my way down, kind of leaving some of the areas just a little bit lighter. So I have got the option to go back after and kind of work into those a little bit. And that's all I'm doing, just making it a little bit more loose there. Just that I know that there's these straight things coming down here behind. I'm popping that on there. Now you could do that with any, like say for this one, you could do that for any of these colours in the background there as well. I think people stick with it because like the other option would be if you've got something like hazy is to work into that background colour and then lift it out with a wet tissue or a damp tissue. However, then it kind of makes it difficult with these in-between bits as well. So I can see why when you're using masking fluid, people tend to stick to that within a picture. Otherwise, you've got like so many techniques going on, it could actually be a lot to think about. So, and you know, I'm not going to know what that's going to look like yet. I'm just kind of looking at where I think the light areas are, and I can always work over them and into them, you know, afterwards. Although the process kind of at the beginning is slower, I think overall with the watercolour it is actually faster. We do, you know, we end up doing more on a painting. Hmm. I'm just kind of getting some idea there of where it is. So I think I'm just gonna make sure that brush is safely. So the other thing we can do with a background is, you know, you can haze it up by adding salt instead if you want to, and kind of where these areas are, and it kind of moves the colour in, or you can leave the salt off. It's entirely up to you. Or you can, so let me find the other picture I had a minute ago. Because the one with the, say, for example, the meadow where you get all these tiny flowers on them. Where is it? What have I done with that? So I can see it. There we go. That's a classic example. So this one, where as you get to the back, the flowers get really tiny. It's very difficult to kind of go in with the tiny dots. What you can actually do for something like that is to flick colour in. Flick this in, and I'm going to do it anyway, just because, just to kind of introduce things. So I'm just going to pop a bit in. This is where if you had an old toothbrush, you get kind of some bigger flicks. Really, it's just to put a little bit on, and then I'm just going to experiment with it anyway, just in between, just a few. It gives, and it's practice again, so you could end up with it where you might not want it, but I'm just going to go in because it gives a quite nice effect actually. I'm not going mad with it though, because I've got to peel it off, and that's like getting hold of where you've flipped. So I'm just going to kind of go in this middle area, so at least I know where I'm going with it. But that can give us really lovely hazy feel when you do it. It's quite, you know, quite interesting. So let's stick to there. And I'm going to put that brush straight in, give it a really good wish around. I'm also going to just put a little bit of fairy liquid on it. And really, what I have to do now is just kind of sit and wait till it dries a bit. So I'm just going to push that through the edge like that. It just preserves your brushes longer, because it is a devil, that this stuff. It really does like glue it. So there we go. And hopefully I'll use that a few more times. So I'm going to take a lot of pause there, but what I suggest to do is, like, you know, you can mix colours whilst you're waiting for the backgrounds, thinking lighter to darker, and decide, do you go in with the yellow tones first, or peachy tones, or do you go in the purples? I'm going top down when I start back, but I'm going to wait until this is all dry and it's really tacky. If it's coming off onto your fingers, it's still too wet. And we don't peel it off until we've done all the paint, you know, till we've done the paint over it. That's, you know, how we kind of build up over the top. So I'll take a long pause. It's a good time to see how everybody's getting on. And I'll see you in a mo. Okay, so it's still not dry yet. So I am going to think about the colours and mix those up, because one of the really important things I think with watercolour is testing your colours and having everything ready, really, you know, having tested the colours and things. So that's a great time whilst this is nice, while it's drying and it's not quite ready. We need to leave all this on while we're painting over. So, like anything, what we need to do is think about once you've painted those on, you know those are going to remain, that those areas are going to remain lighter. So that's what we wanted to do. So that's safe. And anything dark, we can kind of build up to that colour. But then it's looking at the layers. So this where we've got quite, and I'd say where we've got quite big areas, like this is kind of quite purpley in places. But then we've got this like these peachy, lovely kind of hazy colours coming through that are quite light. So it's like, well, which do we do? Do we do the flowers or the haze? Well, I'd say I'd probably go for the haze because it's coming between. It's coming between them. And then I'll build my colours up with these flowers over the top. And I'm going to have to leave that to dry as well. So that's another layer of process we hadn't really thought about perhaps, but this is what happens with everything that we do. With something like this, you've got more kind of light greens that you can just go in with those very light greens or maybe a few of your yellows. And they're a similar tone, so you don't need to worry about them mixing as much. And you can drop those in without them turning like if it was yellow and blue together, then we'd have to be a bit careful because then we'd end up with green, but you've already got green in there and it's a warm colour, so you'd be okay with that. So yeah, we're just going to just think about these colours that come in. So while this is all drying, all I'm doing is just thinking, oh, what kind of peachy colours have I got in there? And with watercolour, just as a reminder, I'm just going to get one of my brushes out. You can go in, if you've got a big kind of background area and you're just going to kind of go over it like this here, like the other one, then you can just go in with a nice big brush. But I'm going to be a bit more careful with mine because I kind of want to get it between and still leave some space for these light lilac colours without it kind of changing the tone of it. So I'm going to mix up with a smaller brush. I'm just going to test. So bring my palette over as well. Just make sure it doesn't kind of go on there too much. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to test some nice colours for this. I can't see the picture now. There we go. So you could use ochres. So I'm going to test these, like some yellow ochre colours. Now the difference is, just as a reminder with watercolour, we need to work light to dark because we can't take those colours over the top if they're very light. It won't, they're too translucent. Whereas other paint is opaque. So I'm just testing like colours as they are. And then we add, if we want them to be lighter, we add more water. So if I add more water and water down that pigment, then it will make the colour lighter. So that's just a very kind of light ochre colour to pop on there. So I'm thinking, well, I quite like that. But then again, it's just testing, colour testing. So then I'd be thinking, well, what about a light peachy tone and white? So white's the one, you know, you can't really use it to paint over. In watercolor, it tends to be a lot of them are very translucent. They don't really cover very well, but you can use it to add to colors to make them more pastely. Now, if you're doing gouache, that's a whole different kettle of fish because that one actually is much more opaque and you can go over the top. So I'm just looking at what color that turns if I use white in it. So pretty much white does make it a bit more pastely and a bit more opaque, which actually suits this bit at the top anyway. But it can really kind of pastel down the bright. So if you're wanting some nice bright colours in there, you might want to, you know, keep going and add in some colours as they are. Well, I like that actually. I might use that at the top. And then, you know, as we go in, we can then start to add the darker colours over the top and things like that, and some brighter ones. You know, don't be frightened of trying some orangey colours. So if I want to go past, if I wanted to go, just as a reminder, so a peachy colour, and go in with a warmish red, and this will depend on what colour you've got in your kit as well. So we're just adapting what we've got in our kit. If you've got loads of colours, you can kind of, you know, choose from a little few more, and we can just really adapt it fairly straightforwardly if we haven't. So this is a warmish red. I kind of mix that with a warmish yellow Now, if you haven't got a warmish red, just put a little bit of more yellow into it. So I'm mixing that together. Now I want to, that's obviously quite bright at the moment, so I will test it. It's really bright. I don't want it that bright because I'm wanting to try and make a peach. So I'm going to make it a bit more translucent by adding more water. It's still quite bright. A bit more yellow in. And then I am going to go in with a bit of white to make it more peachy. You can see all together how pastely that went then. I'm just looking for the colours at the top at the moment. Yeah, that's quite nice. I quite like that. I think I'd even thin it down a bit more. So all I'm doing is adding more water to this mix here. So I'm just adding more water. So you can see that's the same colour with more water added. So we're just thinking, you know, what colours shall I add? How thin do I need to make it? How strong do I need to make it? So this is kind of, I'm looking at these colours for between here really, which is great. I've got a bit of other colour mixed in, which is a bit daft, but never mind. So yeah, so you know, you can add some to make it a bit more peachy or a bit more red, or I'm gonna try just a touch more red in there. It's still quite bright still, so I'm just gonna add a bit more water in. And we just, you know, it's this trial and error, which is great to do whilst this is drying, is to think what colours do I want between there, you know. I might use a combination of that one and the other one. So I'm going to use the ochre with a bit of white, I think, the lighter ochre. But I'm not just going to stop there. I'm going to make sure that I'm also thinking about some of these colours a bit further down as well, so that I can kind of blend them together so they're not going to create a big patch. Sometimes you get a big patch if you stop. I still need more water, put loads of water in here. And that's good. So the other thing is always with watercolour, mix up more than you need, because it's sometimes quite difficult to go back and find that colour that you've used. I mean, it's not a massive problem, but if you've got plenty prepped, especially with a big piece where you've got a lot of the same colour, it does help. Adding more water, then I'm testing again. So you look at the difference between all of these colours, it's quite really different, isn't it? So I've got two colours I'm happy with for the top there. Still a bit tacky in places, so I'm still not quite ready to go. It won't be long now. It can take 10 to 15 minutes to dry, you see. And if it's cold, a bit longer. If you're in a warmer space, it takes less time. So I'm just going to remove this palette because it keeps getting moved around off my watercolour set. There we go. And then what I'm doing, so I'm just move this over, and then trying to think about some of the other colours that I might bring in. I'm quite fancying like a more of a brighty orange colour in there, and then there's these lovely greens. Now, because it's quite these warm greens as well, the browns I'll leave till last. So I'm thinking about the lighter ones first. It's really the background before I start layering over some of these other greens and things at the bottom. But I'm wanting to think about the oranges and take it all the way down to the bottom of my page. So I'm going to think about maybe bringing in a brighter orange here. But you don't have to do that at all, you know, like it just is down to you with personal choice and colour entirely. It's just the experimenting it and putting the colours together on a palette and thinking, do I like those? Even if, you know, you can completely go in a different place to what you can see. I like that bright, you see, there's a little bit of real colour in there, bright colour. Because I can drop in some of the darker ones. I'm just thinning them down, see what it's like when I start thinning it down a bit. Yeah, I quite like that. This is where like personal preference really helps make your painting just exactly yours, makes it your own artistry as opposed to, you know, trying to recreate a photograph. It's just much more artistic and artisan from the artist's hand. which is why we admire, isn't it, all of the artists that we see a lot of the time, because they're just so unique. Okay, so then I might thinking about some of the other colours I might drop down the bottom here as well. I mean, there are some darker browns, and I might even get that ready. The thing we've got to think about is how much we let something dry before we put the next layer in. You know, it might be that you might want a slightly darker colour in there that you layer over, or you might just want to get your lighter greens in down the bottom. I'm going to transition that to some lighter greens, but then you drop in some of these colours whilst it's just a bit damp. So that's another factor we've got to think about is, you know, if we drop this colour in, how wet do we let it, how dry do we let it be before we drop it in? And do we want that colour to mix or don't we? Do we want to keep it a little bit more, you know, a little bit more in control? But, you know, there is so many ends of the spectrum, and this is why it's so great to experiment, because you might think, I love that dropped in effect, or you might think, I do not like that dropped in effect. It's just to work out what you personally really like. So I'm now looking for some kind of warm browns. So I'm going for, on this one, this is like the darker colours. I'm not going to pop these in just yet, but I'm going to have them ready because I want to test them together and see if they look nice. So if I wanted to drop them in, I have the ability to do that. Okay, yeah, I really like that actually. Really enjoying these colours. So if I thin them down, how does that make it? Okay, it's a bit too light, so I'm going to just add a bit more pigment. This is like a burnt sienna. It's kind of a warm brown. If you don't have burnt sienna, that's okay. You can use some red and a bit of brown together, or a bit of yellow ochre and a bit of brown and a bit of red. Just kind of have a go with it and experiment. And I've used that quite straight. I'm not adding any pastel colours. And then I'm thinking about my greens. I'm not going to look at this purple palette yet because I'm going to wait until it's dried a bit before I start dropping that in. But I'm going to look at these greens, and I'm kind of going to go for, so again with the green, I'm thinking I quite like, there's almost some bright greens in there. I'm using another palette here at the bottom so it's not getting mixed up. I might think I want some lighter, brighter greens and some that are a little bit more like warmer ones. So I've kind of gone in with a bit, there's quite a bright leafy green there. And I might weave this in amongst some of the other colours I'm bringing down to the bottom underneath there. Let's give it a test first. And again, this is just to test how much pigment I want included when I do the paint. I quite like that amount of pigment actually, the colours together. And again, you know, whether you want to thin it down or not is entirely up to you. So we'll try that. I might just mix up a bit more. It doesn't, sometimes you end up using quite a lot. And if there's a bit left, it doesn't matter. And there's almost some little kind of almost yellowy colours in there as well. I'm just seeing that now. So I'll have those, I think, ready to drop in. I'm going to go for a kind of a buttery cup yellow, a bit warmer. And I might just drop some of those in unexpectedly in a few little places. Not everywhere, perhaps just a few. So yeah, it's good to be able to think about how we put these together, isn't it, in advance with the watercolor. So it does, that kind of patient waiting for this to dry is really helping us to kind of look at the whole palette, the palette as a whole, isn't it? It's really nice, isn't it? Same with the other one. You know, you can really kind of think what colours do I want to pop in. Right, so I've got the dark one. So I wanted another green, slightly more dull, darker. So let's see. No, I don't like that one actually. I don't feel that works in my palette, but this is why it's a good process. That one it's really dark, isn't it? I'm going to go to that till the end, so I'm not going to mix that. What I might do is just have another bit of green over this side. There's not as many dark areas, and I'm just going to actually add a bit of this orange in there. See what happens. And it's, oh, that's it. It's kind of more mossy. That's what I was after. So there we go. So I've got this almost mossy. It's actually gone a little bit, for me, it's gone a little bit too mossy. So I'm going to pop a bit of green back in. And that's the beautiful thing about watercolour. You can very easily kind of rectify or save your colours and do something differently with them. There we go. Right, I'm happy with that. Again, I think I'm just going to thin that down slightly. They're quite a bit darker, these greens, aren't they? So we'll work those over the top anyway. Okay, so we can just have, I'm move this palette to the side for the moment. We can then start to just check, you know, is it, are we near there? Well, that mine's definitely tacky now, and I had quite a lot on mine. So we'll leave that on, and then we can start to build up these areas. So what I'm going to do is just work top and down and just kind of start to bring it in. I'm going to bring in, I'm going to use a bigger brush. I'm not, because my paper's small, I don't really want a massive, a big thick brush, because I'm kind of going to weave in a couple of colours as we go. So I'm going to go in this really, just move this over the side, just to put it on the end of the paper. Just over for the moment. You can see the edge of the paper. And just going to kind of go in and bring this colour down. It's a bit hazy at the top. And sometimes we don't really know always what that's going to look like when it's dry anyway, but we're just going to go with it really. Just bringing it in between, just a little bit. I'm bringing it down because as we go down, I'm going to change the colour, but I've got it it's quite damp actually, is this, quite wet, so I'll be able to kind of work into it if I want to. And I'm just moving it around, and I've got, obviously I'm going, and you can go over the edge of the over the edge quite easily. Of the masking fluid. Bringing that in between it. Kind of quite being quite loose with it, just not thinking too much about that. Think about it a little bit, but obviously all my light areas are covered anyway, so I'm just kind of enjoying getting that paint in between. Really light. But you can kind of like go around the edges as well if you want to. So I'm like looking at how it transitions now, and I'm going to start bringing in, because this is such a similar tone. So this is the beauty. Because these tones are very similar, I can start to now drop in this other colour, which is a slightly different colour. You can't tell as much while wet, but I'm kind of dropping in some of these other nice pinks and stuff. Well, it's not pink, it's the peachy one that I've mixed. Bringing that down, it warms it up a little bit. I'm bringing that down. You know, if you want to kind of move the paint so it's not collecting, you can do that as well, or you can just like leave it nice and thickly. So I'm kind of bringing in, and this is the beauty, isn't it? Because we can just kind of go ad hoc over the edge like that and not worry about it. And we can go back and drop colours in as well if we want to put a little bit more in it, for example, of a particular colour. So I'm just dropping this. And this was going to take a bit of time to dry as well, so we have got thinking time while we're doing it. And then, you know, thinking about what you want to do, what colours are you wanting to transition, that kind of a thing. So I wanted to get a little bit more colour and vibrancy into this bit down here. So this is where I was kind of quite happy to experiment with dropping in some more bright colours, but it's still, so I'm going in, it's still kind of transitioning over through the other colour, but just dropping in some brighter ones. And again, because this is a similar tone, it's not going to run and make an awful colour together with the other one. Quite a restricted palette, isn't it, really? So just continuing to drop these lovely colours in, enjoying those a lot. Add a little bit more to that. So I said, it does take quite a lot of paint sometimes. We're not quite ready for it. I'm dropping enough water in there. Yeah, okay. I'm still dropping them in over the tops of these, over the tops of our, but yeah, this can be any colour. You use any colour that you kind of really enjoying using. I just fancied a pop of colour in there. And I'm just working a little bit back up a little bit, so it gives just a kind of just a loose effect up at the top because it's still very wet. Still bringing that down a little bit. Really nice. It's all over the top of the masking fluid. And then in here, let's have a little look. I've still got some quite bright ones down the bottom here. So I'm going to bring in some of that colour down, just in kind of ad hoc places really, because then I can weave my other colours between. Just going to get some pops in there as well. And this is because we can be so loose with it, because we can just go straight over it. Definitely is nice to do. Some pops of those colours at the bottom. Because it's quite damp and because I've not got loads and loads of pigment in it, it's just kind of making that little transition. And then I'm going to bring in a few of these bright yellow pops as well that I mixed up earlier, just in between. And again, it's not going to ruin the colours together because they're both bright, both like very warm colours. If we were to do opposing colours like these ones, we'll have to wait till that dries to get these blue based ones in. A little bit, otherwise it'll kind of make it muddy and a bit grey. If we want to keep our colours nice and vibrant. Yeah, and you know, this is the beauty, isn't it? None of us know what it's really going to look like. We know it's going to work, but we're not sure the what. And that's just, we kind of like surrender that to watercolour really, because we know it's. Just bear with me, my phone is just going off. That would be helpful if I plugged the power in the first place. There we are. Right, so just bringing some of these pops in, these yellows, just gives it a little bit of a different feel at the bottom here. Yeah, and then you can have a look at where you are with it, can't you? And say, so, you know, these greens are quite yellowy greens, so I am going to start to bring in a few behind of the fronds behind that are that brighter green now. Just keeping it moving. So Now you can wait to get these, and if you prefer, if you want it to look more specific, of course you can wait. I'm not worrying too much because I feel that it is a bit hazy anyway, as long as I kind of get a suggestion of that it might be some kind of leaf. I'm more than happy with that. So it's more about how you're feeling about what kind of a shape it's getting. If you're wanting it to be very specific, then by all means, you can wait till it's a bit more dry. So I'm quite enjoying all those different tones together, really. I've just been keeping it moving, keeping it moving, so that if you want it to all blend, then it will. I'm just bringing it right over that masking tape at the bottom as well, so we don't end up with a, with it stopping before it beats the bottom. There we go, some dropping in these. And obviously these are the lighter greens. I'm going to go in with some darker greens and a few of these browns as well in a mo. But you can't specifically see what's going on with these. We just know that there are some kind of leafy habit there, but we can't really necessarily tell exactly what, can we? So you can actually go really loose if you want to, and just let your imagination give you the information. But it's really lovely. This is kind of where you get into that lovely, lovely flow. I'm just doing some like crisscrossing it over and that kind of thing, really. And I might then, having a little look, do I want to bring some of that green up a little bit or not? Are there any areas I want to drop in a few more bits of yellow? So we're just making those decisions as we're going through this kind of, this lovely coloured background here. And then in between, I'm actually decided I want to go put some oranges back in there. So I'm just going to mix up a bit more. Just pop some of these. Maybe it's a little bit too bright, that one. Just put a bit of that yellow back in it. Just working it in between. And you'll notice like some colours will be drying off a little bit as well. So you might think, oh, actually, I don't mind putting that orange back. It's okay. If you feel it's kind of not mixing in the way you want it to, if it's kind of blurring your colours, then, don't just wait till it's dried off a little bit more before you put anything in. It's your artwork, so you get to decide all of those things. And then I'm going to go in now. I'm going with a smaller brush. I'm just going to start to build up the colour. So I'm going to get some of these dark things. I want some contrast. So I'm not thinking about the top still. I'm just looking at these kind of darker, these bits I was saying, like these sienna-y bits here, and some of the darker green as well. So I'm going to go in, because I'm working on this dark green, I'm going to go in with that and just start to just put the odd bit of green in there. Darker one behind. You don't have to either. You don't have to do that. It's just the colours that you've chosen. We kind of start to build up, you know, the darks in there as well, and then we do get that nice contrast with watercolour. So you can still have like a really washy effect, and also a contrast as well. You know, sometimes people say I can't get a sense of what's going on. Well, I would say just make it slightly, you know, some areas slightly darker then. Right, so much need to mix a bit more of that up. I think it was orange and green together. And just dropping in a few of these colours behind. It'll all change again. It really does change again once we get once we start to get the stems in. It will really change. So don't worry if you're thinking, it will definitely change. Now I'm going to go in with this dark brown now as well. Well, this kind of, I've gone in with a burnt sienna because that's the colour I liked. But I may even go in with a dark, we'll see. Now this is where I'm just being a little bit careful that I don't end up with too much of a muddy area, because I just kind of want to drop in a few little darker colours like this in here behind some stems and things like that. Just where you get those little patches in the ground. Just for a bit of depth. So I'm just kind of building in those. But again, they go behind, so it will all change once we get all these dark stems in, all the stems. But it just gives a little bit of a contrast having something slightly darker. And it could be, you know, you could go in really dark brown if you wanted to. Now it will run if it's very wet. So again, it's just deciding how much you like in it running. I'm quite enjoying dropping this in. I'm dropping it all the way down here as well. The other thing as well is just like thinking about when to stop with it. So if you're not sure, just kind of have a stand back and a look at where you are. You can always add more in later, but you can't do it the other way around, take it out. So it's easy done where we kind of get a bit, yeah, but all the same, enjoy making those marks. It's lovely, isn't it? It's really enjoyable. Well, I think I'm going to make a stop in a moment here. Feel happy enough with where things are going. I've still got to put this background bit up at the top in as well. So I'm just going to leave that to dry for a moment and just take a pause there, see how everyone's getting on. Okay, so just going to go back to the top here. It's all, this bit's dry. It's not dry at the bottom, so I'm not going to work on like remove any of this masking fluid, but I'm going to now carefully remove the top so I can do a little bit more there. So we'll end up with these kinds of shapes where there's a little bit of lighting and I can build on that. So I'm just very gently, this is why you need to make sure your paper's dry, is just gently rub off where you're kind of going. Now, I also, along this middle, I'll do this bit section, I did a bit of flicking of it as well, so we'll see what that turns out like. But yeah, you just kind of rub it around in circles and it comes off very gently, and then it shouldn't take off the top layer of your paint if you've let it dry enough, so that's a good thing. You might need to blow some of the bits off though, so they don't get stuck in the bottom of the wet, you know, where you put the bottom end of things. So you can see where the relief is, but you can also see, and that was, I was being very kind of like just ad hoc with my brush marks with the putting the masking fluid on there, but it still left it quite angular. So I'm going to have to soften that down a little bit. So that's the only downside of people say about using masking fluid is you sometimes end up with this quite a hard edge, and you don't always want a hard edge. But we can easily soften it down by just kind of bringing some shapes back in, using a little bit more of the colour we use as the background as well, and bringing that in. But I'm just going to kind of work in light to dark some of the colours that I want to think about. So now I've used all the other ones, I'm happy to do that. So I'm not going to do any more rubbing off, just the top bit for now, because mine's not dry. If yours is dry, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure it's all off before I apply any more paint. And then I'm going to go in with my big brush again and just drop it in. So when we're mixing, when we're thinking about like purples, we just want to think about, is it more of a bluey purple or is it more of a reddy purple? But of course you can use what colours you like. So even if it was one or the other, go for it. Don't worry too much about the exact photograph, and think about what colours you're really kind of drawn to. So yeah, so some of your purple, you might have more than one purple in there, and it may be more on the red spectrum. That means it's got more red in than blue. If you haven't got a purple, then you can just try mixing the red that you've got and the blue you've got, or two different blues even, or two different reds, and see what colour it kind of gives you. So this is quite warm. So if I do that on there, look, it's still quite warm, isn't it? So that's definitely got more red in it. So I'm going to go along. You can even put more, you have a purple and add more, see that one's much more, much more kind of lilac-y. So there's two things I can do with that. That's a very dark colour. Obviously that's like, we'll build that up last, so some of the pigment's going to, but I'm going to take some of the same pigment here and just thin it right down so that it's much lighter in tone, and see if that's a good base colour. Yeah, it's quite nice. That is quite nice. And I'm just going to work it in between some of these, just kind of dropping it, just really, because it is quite blurry in the background. I'm just dropping it, just kind of making like circular movements with my, almost like little circular movements. I'm leaving some of the white to come through. Very hazy. I might even just add a little bit of pinky to one of them. And I'm just adding that nice and thinly across these flowers here. You can go down a brush if you want, but I want mine to be quite loose so that it feels like it's all a bit kind of blendy in there. Oops, I've gone over that flower, that's going to come off. Here. Yeah, you can make it even lighter if you want to. You can start like with a really much even lighter layer on. I'm not going to today, but you can go with like a really light pinky one. I might here, because this seems quite light, doesn't it? So I'm going to add even more water to that bit. Just softening down. I'm just kind of getting a sense of the flowers in there. It gets even more diffused over this side. Yeah, just kind of just pop in some of these, just. And then what we can do with those is literally just, you know, work in some of the darker ones. So I'm just going to drop in through here. And again, this is where you decide how dry do I want it to be. Do I want it to let dry get a bit more so it's not just bleeding really loads in there, or with my paintbrush, or do I want to let it run? So it is quite hazy. So again, it's just choices to make really. You can just have an experiment and see which you like best. Do both and try it. So I'm just building in, you know, these darker areas now. So as well, if you're just discovering that you're quite liking dropping these in and letting them splay, but then you've one area's dried already, you think, oh, it's gone really hard now. Just pop, just damp just dampen just dampen your paper a bit, and it will start kind of splaying out again. We just want a sense, don't we, that these flowers in the background there. You know, you can almost haze them right out. You can bring them, you know, much more thinly over the top. You know, that's what I'm doing, just over the top of that peachy bit there. Just hazing it out a little bit, making it just kind of wiggling the brush over it really. So there's almost a suggestion that there's more in the background without kind of scrubbing up the colour underneath the orange. And then we're good to go with it, just exploring these lovely colours. As we go through, dropping a, you know, if you need to drop them anywhere else, just drop them in. And then again, you know, it's just letting those other bits dry. So I'm hoping bottom dry enough now that I can, yep. So I'm then going to go in the bottom area here where I haven't, and start to take off the masking fluid here. And then we'll end up, you know, with these shapes, and probably, you know, you might have ones that are blobby, or you might have ones that have got some shape, but we can put some shape into them, or we can just apply the paint. Now that was there, that's, you can see what's gone wrong there, because I've kind of, that's still dry, not drying up there, so I've kind of just be a bit more careful not to go into the areas that are not dry yet, and stick some ones that are dry. I've got some in the middle here, some interesting ones that I flicked. I'm taking those off. It leaves just a little bit of a mottled area. It's interesting. I think the fun you could have if you were doing planets or something like that. Pop this on, you can end up with all like starry background. Be nice. Yeah, so we end up with this. We're ending up with these lovely, lovely stalks, buds, whatever else you've popped in. And actually, the last bit is actually quite straightforward. And that we're thinking, well, I'll chat about it and while we're taking this off. You're thinking about what you're going to do with the flowers. So if it's the daisies, we're going to work in within the flower. We're going to work in any yellow centres. Are we going to pop any of these little buds in? Are we going to, pop the stems in underneath? We can probably keep it quite separate doing that. Oops, I've just done that again. So I need to be a bit more careful. So not to leave the tops of those because it's still a bit damp up there. Yeah, so probably I'm just gonna start to make my flowers take shape a little bit here. So I'm just gonna go in with a nice kind of daisy coloured centre. They're always a little bit lighter on the inside, I find, on the top, and then they've got a bit brighter. So I'm just going to put one in here. Like that. Let's start somewhere, haven't we? And then I'm just going to go around the bottom of that is dark. I might have to darken it when it's a bit drier. And yeah, it's looking a bit strange at the moment, but I'm going to look at underneath, get the shadow underneath them. So I'm going to go in with a colour under here. And then you can decide on, how dark you want to make your stems. Just looking for a dark green. Really dark one there. We could go in with like almost a burgundy kind of a brownie as well. And I'm just starting to pop this in. So it really transforms once we start getting those, thinking about the flower heads and the stems. You can just work your way through. I know I said work light to diet, but you can actually keep the bottom bit separate anyway from the flower head. So that's okay. If you want to go in and put them stems in just to give it a sense of place, sometimes it's quite difficult to see what's happening with them. You can do that last if you want, or you can start to do it, but it really, really starts to look quite different once we start to get elements of those flowers in. So just going to go around the daisy, put some of these daisy heads in. Daisy centres, sorry. Can't always see them. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But this is the thing that our eye works out that what's going on, our brain, sorry, and tells us. So we don't always have to do something that's perfect because our brain tells us what's happening. Even if we can't see what's happening with the colour, with the centres or whatever. A little bit there. So it may still feel that it's a bit like it doesn't feel like it's an actual daisy, or I can't really see kind of what's going on. So that's when you can work into these a bit if you want to. You could bring in a bit of a darker colour around the outside, for example, or a similar tone that you've used already in the background, and just bring a little bit of, I'm just using like a bit of more of an ochre colour here. And what I'm doing is I'm putting the shape back in just by pushing it in between some of the leaves, so it feels a bit more daisy-like, and it gives a bit of contrast anyway. So I've just got the ochre in there, the burnt sienna colour in there actually, just making it that bit darker. So we can create the shape like that. That helps as well. But then we've got all these other things going over the top. So there's lots of things we can do yet. But yeah, just enjoy. Kind of, I'll pop that shape back in a bit. But you can keep it really loose as well. If you've really enjoyed making it really loose, then don't worry too much about putting any shape back in it. It depends how you feel about it. That's what it's always about. You know, if you feel like it needs a bit more shape, put a bit more shape in. If you feel like you're quite happy leaving it nice and loose, leave it loose. There is no wrong way of doing it, only really trying to get what you like. I would say. Yeah. You can always kind of make this part of the background as well if you're trying to if you are trying to pop a bit more shape back in and you're not so happy with it not feeling too daisy like. Same with the buds. You might think, oh, some of these buds don't feel, I can't tell what they are. Well, you know, just give them a bit of a shadow. Work in the colours that you can see as well inside them. And then that kind of helps pop the shape back of these little buds as well here. And certainly then when you start to put them on little stalks as well, really helps from here. You know, the leaves, you know, anything with a leaf in it as well. And kind of create the shape of that a little bit more. Any shading in them. I'm not going to do too much to mine, to be fair. I'm going to keep them quite loose. Just going to soften that down. It feels a bit too angular. Yeah. You know, even at the bottom, like underneath all of the daisies as well, you get this kind of dark patch, don't you? So, you know, you can go in the really dark brown if you wanted to with it, or a green, or dark green for the stems. Just work your way through like any other little process, kind of. Just popping those bits in place. Oops, forgot about these up here. It's dry, I can get those off. Oops. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So then we can really kind of start pulling them all together with some of these nice dark contrasting stems. Some that are joining, some that are not. And that, I think, is when it really starts to transform. And we get these, they're coming all the way over the top of everything. not far off with that, really. Yeah, some go this way and some go that way. You can put like a different colour, like a purple in if you wanted to, just to kind of, or a burgundy or an ochre colour or a, see, just have an explore what colours you like in there. And just keep popping them all in. Put the ones in the background, and if you want to make the ones in the background slightly lighter, you know, you can do that. Well, these just crisscross, don't they? They're really, I'm not quite sure where they come from or what they're joining onto, but it's kind of this lovely, you know, swaying kind of movement of all of these different these lovely different. This way and that way. Anything in the background. Just popping all of these things we can see in, really. It just kind of makes this lovely picture. Yeah, and you can just kind of just work your way through and just decide, is there anything else that you want to pop on there, really. Um, and there we go. So yeah, so just darken anything. I'm going to kind of call it a day there, I think. So we've done had a really lovely run at that and a really good experiment tonight. But I hope that's been really helpful and enjoyable. That's my last pause there today. Thank you.